All right, welcome back. In this lesson, we're going to talk a little bit about how TV advertising has remained incredibly effective, but it started to make no sense for smaller businesses. In fact, we're going to talk a little bit about what actually broke with traditional TV advertising and why so many advertisers have moved to other platforms. So let's take a look. Okay, on to lesson 2. In the previous lesson, we established that television advertising itself is extremely powerful, even today. So the obvious question becomes, if TV ads are so effective, why did so many, especially small businesses, stop using them? This lesson is going to answer those questions. Traditional TV advertising didn't stop working because people changed or because TV lost its influence. It broke because the systems used to buy, sell, and measure TV ads became inefficient, overly expensive, and misaligned with how modern businesses operate. TV advertising, well, it became too expensive. In reality, it was always expensive, but it definitely became more expensive to access with a smaller audience. One of the biggest problems with traditional TV advertising has always been the cost. Buying TV ads required large upfront commitments, there were minimum spends, long-term contracts, and production costs that made entry very, very difficult. Even businesses that could afford TV advertising often struggled to justify the risk of creating a commercial, getting locked in, putting it out there, paying for the ad buy. For many local businesses, TV advertising was not a strategic choice. It simply was out of their reach when it comes to the finances. Traditional TV advertising also came with very little flexibility. Once a campaign was booked, it was very difficult to adjust. If an ad wasn't performing well, if the messaging needed to change, or if market conditions shifted, the advertisers were often locked into long-term contracts, and it was very slow and difficult to make any changes, if you could even do them. This rigidity made TV advertising feel very risky, especially to local businesses, and especially when compared to emerging digital channels that allowed for rapid testing and iterations. Targeting was also very broad and very inefficient. Traditional TV ads were sold based on large geographic regions, often entire metropolitan areas or designated marketing areas. To put that in perspective, where I live in Loganville, Georgia, we're actually split in half by 2 different counties, and we have multiple cable outlets here. So when you talk to one of the cable outlets, oftentimes their region would be in one county, so you could get half of the city and then a bunch of cities you didn't want, and then another different rep would have the other half of the city and a bunch of different cities around it, and you could not get the full area that you wanted without picking up all the other cities and paying basically double to get 2 different areas. That is completely inefficient and just out of the reach for almost every local business in our small town. That meant people were paying to reach people that were not their potential customers. A local business serving a small radius is often forced to advertise to hundreds of thousands of viewers that are outside of their service area. This inefficiency made TV advertising feel even more wasteful rather than strategic. Now, TV also targeted programs and not people. Unlike modern digital platforms, traditional TV offered little control over who actually saw an ad. Advertisers couldn't target based on location within a city, household characteristics, or viewing behavior. Ads were placed into programs, not audiences. As an example of this, you may talk with your representative and you know what your target audience is, and they're going to say, well, gee, on A&E, these programs are going to kind of fit your audience, so we'll place you on A&E at 7 p.m., and hopefully that will get the audience that you want. That's not very targeted, and it's not very effective. This lack of precision limited TV's usefulness for businesses, especially small businesses, that needed the targeted exposure rather than mass awareness. So the other thing is, advertisers couldn't really see actual results. Measurement was almost impossible when it came to this. Traditional TV relied specifically on ratings and estimates. Advertisers were told approximately how many people might have seen their ads based on sampling and statistical models. So they can say, well, A&E had this many viewers, and but it wasn't necessarily your viewers, and it didn't really tell you how many people went to your website. And of course, if people were using things like DVRs, they were probably just skipping right past your ads anyway. So there was no clear reporting on actual impressions delivered, completion rates, or frequency at the household level. For businesses used to digital analytics, this lack of transparency could be very, very frustrating, especially considering the prices. Now, optimization is also pretty much impossible. Because measurement was indirect, feedback was very slow and unclear. Advertisers often had to wait weeks or months to determine whether a campaign had any impact at all. And even then, the results were difficult to attribute with confidence. Did you get the calls because of your TV ad? Or did they find you on Google? Did they see you on a billboard? Did they find you in a magazine or a newspaper? You really couldn't tell most of the time, and so you kind of had to just guess, well, it seems like my TV advertising was effective. But this makes optimization almost impossible, and it reinforces the perception that TV advertising is nothing more than a guessing game, because it kind of was. Now, TV advertising, of course, was built for the big brands. Taken together, the high cost, the wasteful targeting, the rigid contracts, the poor measurement, traditional TV advertising effectively excludes local businesses for the most part. And many businesses didn't avoid TV because they didn't think it worked. They avoided it because the system didn't make sense for their scale, their budgets, and their risk tolerance. TV advertising became something that only large brands could realistically use. Now, advertisers also lost confidence in the system itself. As digital advertising platforms emerged, advertisers began comparing the experiences between running TV ads on cable or on broadcast TV versus running an ad on Google or Facebook or some other digital platform. Digital ads offered control, flexibility, immediate reporting, and traditional television started to feel really slow, was very expensive, and seemed completely opaque by comparison. This contrast accelerated frustration and pushed advertisers away from TV, even though TV ads themselves were still extremely effective. So in other words, TV didn't fail, the system did. This led to widespread misunderstanding that television itself wasn't working anymore for local advertisers. In reality, the medium was still extremely powerful. What really failed was the infrastructure that was around it, the buying model, the targeting limitations, and the measurement systems. This distinction is critical for understanding why streaming advertising works today very, very effectively. This new TV advertising model was necessary for the modern era. Once advertisers had experienced targeting, reporting, and flexibility in digital advertising, there was no going back to the slow reporting that TV provided. The industry needed a new way to deliver TV advertising, one that preserved its strengths while removing all the inefficiencies. This made the evolution towards streaming not just likely, but inevitable. So here's the key takeaway. Traditional TV advertising broke because it became overly expensive, inefficient, and opaque, not because TV ads themselves didn't work. Understanding that distinction is essential for understanding what's coming next. And speaking of what's coming next, in the next lesson, we'll examine where the audience went when they left cable and why advertisers had no choice but to follow them.